Alright, let us begin. Hello everyone, and welcome to BHD Studios, and welcome to my latest video. I want to talk about these two cameras right here, the Leica M10-R with a 28 Summicron and the Fujifilm X-Pro3 Durablack with the 35 f1.4, the original. Now, why do I want to talk about these two cameras here? Well, it's because I went through my top picks for 2023. And as I looked through it, I realized a lot of it was the same for 2024. And instead of blazing through 40 different things that are like my favorite this, my most used that, I wanted to maybe go into a little bit more detail of, so last year in 2023, what were my two favorite cameras that I shot for personal photography, even though I did use these cameras for work as well. On my days off, when I'm with Camera Girl, when I'm with my friends, if I go on vacation, which of these cameras did I end up using the most? Or like which cameras did I use? And really gravitated between these two. And many of you know I have an entire ecosystem of both systems. I am using both of them. Right now I'm using the X-T4 to shoot this video. And so that's my main studio overhead talking head camera. And it has been since 2020. But I have started including like the SL2 and like a Deluxe 8. And many of you know for many years when it comes to film, I've been shooting Leica. And I think a lot of you have discovered me through my Leica film photography videos as well as my trips. Whenever I travel somewhere, I'll take at least one, if not two film cameras, and it's been Leica. So these two are my favorite personal cameras, and I wanted to kind of explain to you why and the story behind it. And part of the inspiration for this video was because I did the video on the Leica ZM11 watch, and in that video I talked about my three main sort of foundational principles behind the tools that I have. And I think I basically said all purposeful tools serve me in three different ways. One is for function, storytelling, and style. And I meant that all my tools, pretty much, including my photographic equipment, has to serve me in those three ways. And so it has to serve me functionally. It has to take great photos. It doesn't have to be the best, but it needs to be able to do the things I want it to do. Number two, it has to have a story behind the brand. Something that I can attach myself to, and with that, I can then attach my own stories to it. And finally, it has to have style. And you can tell both these cameras just ooze with style. So let's start off with the X-Pro3. This is the Durablack X-Pro3 from 2019. I actually helped launch this camera back in 2019, so thank you so much Fujifilm Canada for including me in that. I got an early copy in the fall of 2019, and it took some amazing photos with it. I went out at night. One time there was a fire, a pretty scary fire actually, but fire chief was there talking, and I just happened to have this camera and the 16-55 f2.8. I took that photo, but I took a lot of night photos, and I really enjoyed shooting with the X-Pro3. I even ended up flying to Toronto. I should actually stop telling my story now because that's actually part of function, storytelling, and style, right? So let's get back to style here. But this is just a beautiful camera. I do have this accessorized using all of Square Hood's products. So this is Square Hood's brass thumb rest, and it's brassing really nicely. It's a nice patina to it. And this is their small brass soft shutter release. But this is also, it might look like the OEM lens hood, but this is Square Hood's Square Hood for the 35-1.4, and it's more squat. It's shorter than Fujifilm's original, so it saves you a couple of millimeters, but you know, when this is around your shoulder, those couple of millimeters makes a huge difference. But I just love the style. The Leica MD, the screenless M bodies, got a lot of flack when it first came out. People laughed about the fact that the camera costs more, but it didn't have a rear screen. Well, Fujifilm basically solved that problem with this, right? Your LCD screen is here. It's just on the inside here. So you can kind of use it like a waist level finder. As well, you can use it when you're in the menus. So if you need to, change your menu settings, you do have access to it. But close it up, and now you pretty much have a Leica MD, and it has that little window. In the old film cameras, that window is where you put film. Here is my Minolta CLE, which was in collaboration with Leica. But see that little window? You just drop in your film, and look at that. I mean, it pretty much mimics that style. So really well designed camera. I enjoy shooting with it. I love the hybrid viewfinder. I pretty much shoot in OVF most of the time with that little mini EVF. I love being able to see outside the frame lines as things enter, just like a real rangefinder camera there. But it has that rangefinder aesthetic. You can shoot it like a rangefinder, except you don't have to manually focus. And this lens here just matches perfectly with the X-Pro3. And in terms of function, it has autofocus, so that's great. It has a dual card slot here. It's weather sealed, titanium top and bottom plate, well made. I do wish that Fujifilm made this out of brass. They actually did say they considered brass, but it was too heavy. But I still think if this was brass and black paint, this would have sold really well. But titanium is still really cool. I hope the X-Pro4 also comes in titanium. So very functional, 26 megapixel. It was one of the early 4th generation cameras. This was the camera where they launched Classic Neg, and I fell in love with Classic Neg. So I have tons of photos using Classic Neg. And so this here is a camera that I use especially when I need autofocus. And recently I took this out where it was pouring rain. I knew I had to walk with an umbrella. And so having this and not having to manually focus as well really serves me great, and it still takes awesome photos. I am a little bit worried about the X-Pro4. I think they're going to get rid of this reverse screen, and if they do that, I'm probably going to just end up buying a Durasilver X-Pro3 and then call it a day with the X-Pro3. And here, the M10R. So basically, I use this camera from 2019 to about 2022 as my daily, everyday, day off camera. And then in 2022, I got a hold of this right here. And thank you so much, Camera West. Thank you, Sean and Ben, who loaned this to me in 2022. We met up at Wetzlar for the COP in 2022. And that was just before the launch of the M11. And so I was able to take this with me to Germany on a long-term loan. Then I traveled sort of all over Germany with this camera. And since then, this camera has taken over. So this camera here, 40 megapixels. And so the R and the M10R are set for resolution. All the M digital bodies before the M10R were 24 megapixels. This is the first time they went higher to 40 megapixels. So this is still high resolution, and it competes well with the M11. And so I tell a lot of people, if you want to get into digital M, but you still want kind of high resolution, so you maybe you're thinking about an M11, I recommend the M10R. And so I'll put links down below for Camera West. They have a great selection of pre-owned Leicas. Some of them actually are Leica pre-approved, so they get the full Leica warranty. And so M10R basically become my primary day off camera. And the reason why is because the M7 is my main film camera and my favorite lens on the M7. Here I have the Brighton Star 28 2.8 pancake lens, so that's crazy, that's a real lens. But my real favorite lens is this 28mm Summicron. And because this is my favorite lens, I can put it on here and take all my favorite photos. So since 2022, 80 to 90% of the time when I am shooting, it is with this because it is a great functional tool. It allows me to use a catalog of lenses that go back 70 years. And so just to prove it here, here is a black paint Leica M3. And let's just take the cap off of here. So it came out in 1954. This is a single stroke, so it didn't actually come out in 1954. It came out a couple of years later, but here we go. And look at that. So you could take a modern, I say modern, this came out in 2002, the 28 Summicron V1, but you can take the latest, greatest lens from Leica and pop it onto the very first M, and they all work. And so having access to 70 years of lenses in terms of a functional tool, it gives you a plethora of lenses from multiple generations. Like the first M lenses were basically around when my dad was born. And you can pick any decade, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Each generation, each leap in technology sometimes became more clinical, but then you lost some of that character. So you could choose any period of time. So imagine even if you shoot Canon, Nikon, Sony, wouldn't it be great if those lenses that you're shooting with, you can go back 7 years of history with that manufacturer? And that's what you get with the M. And so for a photographer who is looking for character, who's looking for unique perspective in terms of unique lenses to be able to capture your stories, then I don't think anything can beat the M mount lenses. At the same time, you can use an M mount lens on a non-M mount camera, right? You can put it on an SL, but also you can put it on a Sony or Canon if you wanted to, and that's fine. I just think the M mount lenses are really great, but If you could put it on an M camera, then that kind of comes down to the storytelling as well as the style part of why I use certain tools into my photographic arsenal. And so let's just put this camera away here, but I will do a video on this very shortly. Alright, so we've established that both these cameras are functional tools. They work well. This is a professional camera. This is a professional camera. If I needed to do professional work, both of these cameras can get the job done. The advantage of this camera here is it has autofocus. The main advantage of this camera here, it has 40 megapixels. As well, it uses M-mount. It's full frame. To me, full frame or 35mm versus APS-C doesn't make a huge difference to me. They both take great images. It's just a matter of the right tool for the right job. Now, in terms of storytelling, both these brands are iconic. Now, Leica this year in 2025 is celebrating their 100th anniversary since their very first camera. Leica's been around since 1869, so they're like a 150-year-old company, but they didn't start making cameras. Their first camera that they actually started selling was 1925. And so they've been making cameras for 100 years. But Fujifilm, they've been around since 1934, and they were making photographic film. And in the 1940s, they started making cameras. So Fujifilm has been making cameras for a long time as well. So both these brands are legacy brands. They've been around for a very long time. But if we're going to focus in on Fujifilm again for just a quick second, Fujifilm is the last major camera company that makes everything from lens to print, I like to call it. So they make optical lenses, they make cine glass, they make broadcast lenses, they make medium format lenses, and they make lenses for their own system. They also make cameras. They make digital cameras and they make analog cameras. If you consider the Instax camera, I mean, technically Instax is an analog camera. There are digital versions of it, but they make film cameras as well. They also make paper. They make chemistry, they make photographic film, they make wet labs. Not inkjet printers, not dye sublimation printers, but proper wet labs that you remember back in the old days where you go to Costco to drop off your film. Well, Fujifilm still makes those machines. And then they also print onto photographic paper. So from the very start, from the film to the lens, to the camera, to the paper, to the chemistry, to the machine, to the final print, Fujifilm does it all, and very few companies used to do it even 10 or 15 years ago. Companies like Kodak, Agfa, Konica, they also made everything, but Fujifilm is the last company left that can do it. They have great color science. They understand color. They make cosmetics in Japan, which makes sense. They also make chemicals as well because they understand the chemical process because of the photographic history that they have. And so in terms of storytelling, Fujifilm is an iconic brand. But when it comes to the cameras, they're also really iconic. They always made quirky cameras that made not a lot of sense in the marketplace. Like since the 1960s and 70s, we think of the Texas Leica, an all-in-one 6x9 medium format, like non-interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras. And not a lot of camera brands were making it, and Fujifilm leaned into it. They made a 6x9, 6x8, 6x7, 645. They made all different types, but in that rangefinder format and non-interchangeable lens. They also made full systems cameras. We think of the GX680, which is basically a medium format camera, but it acted like a large format camera. They made the X-Pan, which was called the TX1 and TX2 in Japan. So it's a 35mm camera that takes panoramic images. A lot of people might not know this, but they also made the GX617, which is the medium format version of the X-Pan. And also they made the very first point-and-shoot medium format camera, the GA645 that came out, I think around the mid-1990s. And then with the GA645ZI, they put a zoom lens in it. And so they've always made quirky cameras. And so when I say quirky, I mean, it was against the grain of what anybody else was doing, but Fujifilm always did what they wanted to do. And so when the X100 was first announced at Photokina in 2010, I wasn't surprised. It's like, oh yeah, this is Fujifilm. And then a year later, it came out in 2011. And then a year after that, the X-Pro1 was an X100 that had an interchangeable lens system, but it was always sold as a professional camera. Weather seal, dual card slot, better, sort of tougher build quality. And finally, when the X-Pro3 came out, I met Kunio Aoyama at the 2022 Fujikina and the X Summit event, and he was really proud of the fact that he had to fight to get this reverse screen on here.
My favorite Fujifilm camera is my lovely X-Pro3.
And so to meet the designer of the camera and talk to him a little bit about, why he designed it this way. There's actually a really good documentary on YouTube called Camera Punk, where it shows they call it the Three Musketeers basically sitting there and planning the X-Pro3. And so there's a beautiful story to the brand, beautiful story to the camera, and then there's beautiful stories that I can add to it, right? Which was I was part of the launch. I flew to Toronto and Montreal with Kwan from Beers and Cameras. We helped Fujifilm Canada launch this camera. I took amazing photos. It's even like using the 10-24. I vlogged with this thing. But I'm gonna walk around and take a few pictures, and then maybe head down to Queen Street, and then maybe have like a dessert, something sweet, because I had spicy food, so I want to kind of balance that out. And so I vlogged with it. I also did a lot of street photography with the 10-24 with this. And then in 2020, I flew to Hong Kong and to Okinawa, and I basically took one digital camera body, the X-Pro3, and two lenses, the XF35 f2 and the 10-24, and that's it. And then my film cameras and nothing else. And so I have my own stories that I can share about using this camera. And so this camera is near and dear to me. I will never sell this camera. Even if it stops working, it goes on the bookshelf and it's just a showpiece, and it has all these beautiful memories that I have. Now, if we take a look here at the M10R, the story I have, what other story is there in the photographic world? This is a historic camera, came out in 1954. It has survived 70 years of changes. Very few cameras can say that they're using the same mount. The Nikon F mount still exists, but they're not really they switched to their own ZF and the mirrorless line. The mounts are not the same. You can get the adapters, but most Japanese manufacturers, they really lean in to SLRs, which now in the mirrorless era, because of the flange back distance to make space for the mirror box, the lenses are too big and they're too bulky. Leica stuck with the M mount, and even though this is not technically a mirrorless camera that you would think in the modern terms, it basically has a mirrorless-like flange back distance. So as they went to digital, it's still reasonably compact and small. And so this camera has survived a lot. This camera has been famously used by Magnum photographers. Some of the greatest photographers of all time has used an M-mount camera. And so to have something like this with its own embedded story from the manufacturer is fantastic. But even for me, being able to take this with me to Leica and meeting Andreas Kaufmann, meeting Stefan Daniel, they call Mr. M. He actually designed the M7. His first project as a project manager was to design and build the Leica M7. So I'll be able to meet him. You can't see it, but underneath the plate, I actually have both Andreas Kaufmann on one plate, and I have Stefan Daniel's signature on the other bottom plate. And, obviously, again, storytelling is just for me. So I have beautiful stories with this. I have beautiful photos. When I went, just even this year, when I went to Taiwan, M10R, and I have some really fun photos of Camera Girl and myself kind of hanging out and walking around all over Taiwan. We went to Montreal, again with Camera Girl. I took the M10R. I took some of my favorite photos of my friends using this camera. So I also have a lot of great stories that I've created with this camera. And again, this camera, not for sale because it's so sentimental to me. And so this was on loan from Camera West. Eventually I said, you know what? Not only is this a great camera, but because I've created so many stories with this, I've taken so many cool photos with a lot of great memories, I just couldn't see myself returning this. And so I said, send me the bill, guys. I'm going to buy this camera. So thank you so much, Camera West, for giving me the opportunity to use this at a time where I couldn't really justify buying it. These two cameras here, for function, works, for storytelling, they both have great stories as brands as well as these cameras. And I've created my own stories with both of these. Now, when it comes down to style, now style is kind of an intangible, right? We all have different styles. And for me, I love shooting not only like the look of a rangefinder camera, because the look is, even if you don't like using it, you have to admit the sleek look of a rangefinder. And it's like a Gibson Les Paul or a Fender Telecaster, right? We're talking 60, 70-year-old designs. But even in the modern era, you look at it, you're like, sure, you could tell it's an older design, but it still has relevance today. It still looks cool, even to a young 12-year-old kid starting playing guitar. They look at those guitars like, I want that one, right? And so these cameras have that same appeal of it has an older aesthetic, an older design that was driven by function at the time, but now a lot of it is also style. And so having these cameras with me, I like having nice things. I like having things that look good, but as well works functionally. And just quickly here, as you guys know, I've been recently talking a lot about wearing two watches, and I am kind of poetic about watches. So I decided, because I'm using a German, I knew I was going to put the Leica on my left side. So here's the 10-11-9 Weltweit, which in German means worldwide, which is perfect because I've traveled the world with this watch. And then on my right wrist here is the G-Shock GWM B5000 TVB, and this is also in titanium. Camera in titanium. So this watch matches this camera, at least in my mind, and this watch matches this camera. And so I love being poetic. I love telling stories with my camera gear, as well as the photos that I take, as well as how I dress and how I function my life. But going back to style again, the style of these cameras, they're just, when I go to a restaurant, half the reason why I put a camera on the table is I love it when people come up and want to talk to me about my cameras. And I just recently did a video in Chinatown, maybe I'll embed a little bit here, where these older gentlemen saw myself and JJ with a whole bunch of Leica cameras, and they all had their own little stories. They said, oh, you know, my father used to shoot with Leica, and they were so interested, and we got to meet them, we exchanged emails, we sent them photos that we took of them. I mean, it's just a great storytelling product, but the style, looking at these cameras just looks fantastic, and yet they take great images. And so I'm not going to go on too much about style, other than, I mean, you just look at it, you could tell both these cameras are just oozing with style. And so I don't mind, I enjoy using both these cameras. In general, over the last couple of years, this has become like 80% of the time this camera is with me on my days off, mostly because I like shooting with my 28. But if I want to shoot with a 50mm equivalent, this 35-1.4 is like a 53.5. This is a fantastic lens. I don't have a Leica 50mm Summilux or Summicron, so I can't take photos like this. I have the 50, here, I'll be right back. I have this 50 Elmar, so it's an f2.8 collapsible, and on my days off, it is nice. It folds down really flat, and when I'm walking around, I can just keep it down like this, and it takes up very little space, and when I need it, I can pull it out. It is f2.8, so if I want that shallow depth of field, I'll put a picture of here where I took of Camera Girl in Kerrisdale. It looks pretty good, but it doesn't have that pop of a Summilux or Summicron. Well, I can get nice pop out of this lens right here, the 35-1.4. And so on days where it's raining, I need autofocus or I need pop, I definitely shoot with this camera and this lens. These two, for me now, are pretty much glued together. And when I need a functional tool, so here, 1 second here. When I need functional tools, so I have the SL2, right? This is 35 Summicron Apo. Crazy lens. It is the best lens I have ever used. And then here is the Fujifilm X-H2 with the new 16-55 f2.8 or whatever the whole thing is. But this is, it's the red label lens. So this is also a great lens for work. They both functionally have the Peak Design system to attach straps, which are very functional. I don't think they look very sexy, but they're very functional. I prefer eyelets because you can put straps on there and look great. They're also huge. Look at the size difference between these cameras. Now, these all have lens hoods on, so they're a little bit artificial, but you can sort of see, right? On a day off, what camera am I gonna use? Yes, I can put a smaller lens on here. Yes, I can put a smaller lens on here, but even still, the bodies are much smaller and more conducive to a day off than these professional tools. So sure, I have these professional tools that I can use for work, but on my days off, or if I'm going on vacation and it's like a job where I don't need to carry something big and heavy like this, then these cameras, as beautiful of tools as they are, they just stay at home. I don't need them. These cameras, I want them. I need them in my life. And so that's my story with the Leica M10-R and the Fujifilm X-Pro3. These are the reasons why I shoot with both of these, why these are still my favorite cameras on my day off, on my personal projects, on days where I just want the joy of taking pictures. Because, for me, I'm not looking for bangers. I want stories. I want to be able to take photos. I'm not out there to impress anyone. I'm out there to enjoy the process of taking photos. Photography is my life. It is my work. And so for me, getting the most volume of pictures that are with the best exposure, with the lowest noise, that are in most pin sharp focus. It's not important to me. I don't care. I want great stories behind the images that I take. At the same time, I like to be a master of my tool. These are tools. Tools are different from devices, and devices, they're like microwaves or like computers. Things can go wrong, you blame the device, right? The image is out of focus. This is wrong, that's wrong, the white balance is off. You blame the device. It's not your fault, it's the device's fault. You don't blame a hammer because you hit your thumb, right? No, it's not the hammer, it's not the tool, it's the master of that tool. And so these cameras make me feel like I'm shooting more with tools than devices. Sure, there's auto features, this is digital, it has auto white balance. Sure, they have features that make them more device-like versus shooting with a film camera, but still showing you the professional cameras, the SL2 and the XH2 that I have that I can shoot with, those will get higher volumes of images, take better overall photos, higher resolution images, but I don't care. I shoot for myself. And that's why these two cameras are my choice for my favorite cameras to shoot with in 2024. And so thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below what were your favorite cameras. Maybe you're like me, you have both Fujifilm and Leica. So let me know what your favorite cameras and what your favorite lenses. And as we close off here, I'm gonna click with both these cameras. So let's turn on both of them here. Thank you so much for watching and happy shooting. All right, and let's shoot with this camera here. Ooh, the shutter sounds much nicer in this one. All right. Peace.